Holy Trinity is a space that's in flux at the moment. It's not operating as a church as such anymore. So it's just about to go through a period of conservation work with the Church Conservation Trust. They have plans for it to become a kind of event community space. And the area has changed massively because the Holy Trinity used to be the seat of Sunderland Parish. So this is where local authority of Sunderland was administered from. In the sort of mid-1800s onwards, as sort of Sunderland centre shifted, Holy Trinity became more and more isolated in terms of trying to relay, I suppose, some of the changes that have happened to the building. It was trying to find something to focus on, and what I came across was a bell peal that was rung in 1898 in the tower that we're standing in now, in the bell tower. And it was a 3-hour, 5-minute long peal of a composition by someone called Benjamin Annabel. At that time, bell peals were quite big public occasions. And there was a peal board in the bell tower, which commemorates that occasion. And I saw that, and really that was the point at which I kind of thought that would become, I suppose, the key thing, to try and base something around that bell peal and the composition. I've been meeting with various people in Sunderland, particularly around the East End, talking to them about some of the changes that they've experienced in living memory, as well as going to archives and finding sources to do with old Sunderland town and Holy Trinity and the things that have affected the area. And then meeting with singers, musicians in Sunderland, groups, community groups whose focus might be music, to see about how some of those groups could become involved in performing the kind of reworked version of the original bell peal. The church bells here at Holy Trinity can't be rung currently because the bell tower is structurally unsafe. So in essence, the bells of Holy Trinity are silenced. So it kind of becomes more poetic, I feel, to think about what would the alternative be in terms of having an element of bell ringing within the piece. The origins of church bells anyway coming from handbells. So Durham and Newcastle Association of Church Bell Ringers are actually doing the handbell ringing, and it ties it back to the original association that rang the peal. So it was rung on 8 bells, and it works through essentially through mathematical sequence. So the order of the 8 bells ringing never repeats itself over the 3 hours, 5 minutes that it was rung. So it was kind of thinking about how do we make it manageable as a composition to rework. So therefore taking the quarter peal seemed a kind of good way forward because it uses a bell ringer's format anyway. And I also have the bell reports from Holy Trinity, and that gives the exact tuning of each of the 8 bells which hangs in the bell tower. So using that, you can create the composition because you know the note or the tuning of each bell and the sequence that the composition would be, the mathematical sequence that's used in the composition. So you can work out exactly how that equates sort of musically to then play it on other instruments or to sing it. The title of the work is Gog Magog, the sort of subtitle of Voices of the Bells. I've picked 5 sections, lyrical sections, that starts with the 24 vestrymen who established Holy Trinity Church and were the seat of local government through until the mid-1800s. Then sort of the cholera epidemic of 1831. So cholera wasn't present in the UK until it entered through the East End of Sunderland. And that was because ships broke quarantine. Cholera wasn't recognised until it was basically too late really to contain it. There were about 215 people died who were buried in the churchyard of Holy Trinity. And eventually, across the UK, roughly about 32,000 people died in the first epidemic. And then cholera returned in the 1850s with about 62,000 people dying in the second epidemic. That was the point where suddenly people became aware that it was a waterborne disease, which then leads into the third section, which is to do with the slums. there was gradually more and more awareness from the kind of mid-1800s onwards of the state of living conditions. Local authorities took the move to clear the slums and to rebuild, which then leads into our fourth section, which is the garths. And that was a series of 7 quadrangle blocks of 4-storey houses. So they were kind of heralded as the kind of new age of social housing. Parts of them surrounded Holy Trinity. The garths is really the point at which we kind of move into living kind of memory. The garths, from talking with people, created within themselves a very, very close-knit community. You know, doors never being locked, people always coming in and out of houses, and it being a very friendly place. If you weren't from there, people were quite intimidated to come into the East End. And then they were modernised during the 1980s, and there was the kind of demise of the Garths community really from that point. It was decided that the Garths would be demolished in the 1990s, and that's really where it then kind of crosses over into the final section, particularly in Sunderland, being massively impacted by the industrial closures, and then shifting kind of more into, I suppose, today and what the community is like today, and I suppose some of the sort of hopes and fears and things that affect people now that are living in the area. Some of this will come through lyrically as well as just influencing the atmosphere of the way we're approaching the kind of rework composition of the bell peal. When it comes to composing, I am working with 2 people from Sunderland, Marty Longstaff and Jordan Miller. It then becomes sort of collaborative between the 3 of us in finding our way through all this information.
From a lyricist's point of view primarily, it was really interesting to dig my teeth into subject matter that wasn't something that was immediately known to me or my family or people that I'm kind of friends with. Digging into historical data and creating pieces of music with lyrics from that was a really interesting experience, and Matt's research was very thorough.
We looked at instrumentation of what was happening from when the church was built all the way through to the present day. So we were looking at the periods and working out what instruments, would have been used back then. And for me, it was kind of quite nice to use things like a hurdy-gurdy. I never composed for a hurdy-gurdy before. We used a harpsichord. It wasn't too hard because I was looking at things like modes for music, which again can kind of place a piece of music in time, which you can hear throughout the piece that changes all the way through. So it was quite exciting to do that, rather than, again, kind of look at it as a popular piece of music.
Yeah, I agree. Certain terms, obviously in literature or if you read a novel, can place a particular piece of work in a time period. If you're a musician and you're listening closely, this piece has got, through me and Jordan, looking into types of modes and different types of music, it's got signifiers of the specific eras.
For me, one of the biggest things that I've taken from it is learning how to use space in music.
It typifies the collaborative nature of this project to me, because if it was just left to me and Jordan, it would have been 50 minutes of total hooks. But with Matt's input and obviously his artistic vision, I think it really worked really well in getting that nice fine balance.
I know you're something on earth. I wonder how you score. Will you keep me a secret? Will I stick in your throat? 30,000 this time and 30,000 next. My gift just keeps on giving. No wonder that you're vexed.
From a very early stage, I'd thought about the piece being laid out as a circle of speakers with the speakers facing outward. And that was partly about the idea of the representation of the eight bells hanging in the tower of Holy Trinity. The handbells were recorded across 8 mics, so there was a separation between each handbell, so with 8 channels of audio. But then we've also mixed different instruments and voices across those 8 speakers as well, so that as you walk around the piece it does change, and at times the bells are really clearly heard, and at other times they're quite difficult to sort of decipher amongst the voices and other instruments. With Marty and Jordan, how we mixed the piece, so we went from the dry recording studio and everything being recorded in a really dry manner, and then bring it into the space, and with the acoustic of the space and the delay in the space, that kind of really brought the piece alive. When the piece opened and was launched, on the opening night, nearly everyone who came to the opening night were local to the area or to Sunderland. Quite a lot of them had been involved in the project as musicians, singers, or people that I'd met with through the process of the research process. That was one thing which was an aim from the start. So through the soup suppers, through the research that I was doing, was to try and, in some ways, build up a community behind the work before it exists. So it wasn't just coming into the space cold. I think going off the launch night that worked. So far, I think the kind of reactions to the piece have been good, and the draw that it's been having. And it is audible from outside of the building. And I think that's kind of also helped. People have said that that's also drawn them into the space because they can hear something going on inside.